Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Entertainment Headquarters, your headquarters where we talk all things entertainment, movies, television, news reviews, and more. And right now, I would like to welcome you to a special segment that I like to do on my channel, and it is called Kaiju Connections. It's where we talk all things kaiju, monsters, all the fun, all the craziness, all the wild, everything. And joining me is Daniel Miller. Welcome, Daniel.
Hello. Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Kevin. How about you?
I'm doing really well, yes. Like I say, there's a lot going on in the world of kaiju right now.
Yeah.
Of course, for people that don't know what kaiju means and don't understand it or would like some more knowledge on it, basically, kaiju is a term that is used in Japan for giant monsters. It means strange beast.
Mm.
And the craze for the kaiju franchise began way back in the 1950s after the birth of the film Beast of a Thousand Fathoms. Um, the world in the 1950s went crazy for over the top science fiction. And after that particular movie, The Beast of a Thousand, 2000 Fathoms, what ended up happening is Japan seen how successful that movie was and wanted to create their own version or a film similar. And that led to the birth of a movie monster that has become iconic, that has become a legend, that everybody over the last, I would say, 10 years has become more familiar with, thanks to the more modern version, thanks to Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures. And that monster, as we know, is Godzilla, king of the monsters.
That's right.
Correct. And obviously, back in the 1950s, because of the birth of the uh, the crazy sci-fi genre that was happening at that time, and because their version of Godzilla basically became a huge success in Japan. America caught wind of it and they even created their version by adding new footage and releasing it in American cinemas. And it became a huge success there, which spawned a franchise that's continued. Now we lead to where we're headed, and that is because of the success of Godzilla and because of the success of the crazy sci-fi genre back in the 1950s. Rival studios wanted to compete, they wanted to make similar money, and they wanted to have similar success. So what they did is they went all out to create their own versions of similar crazy, not just monster kaiju movies, but just over the top crazy sci-fi movies. But one particular studio decided to compete with Godzilla by bringing forth their own monster slash kaiju. And that monster has been a thorn in Godzilla's side ever since, as he is classed, especially in Japan, as his main rival. And that monster is known as Gamera. There we go.
Yep.
So, Daniel, what I want you to tell me, what was your first experience or exposure to Gamera in general?
My first exposure to Gamera was when I was around 15 and I was on the internet one day. And I don't know if yes, it was Gamera the Invincible. which is the American dub of the original Japanese giant monster Gamera. And because I had a rough idea as to what Gamera was, because I've seen uh, stop motions on YouTube of Godzilla versus Gamera, and I've seen trailers for it on YouTube for the Heisei trilogy on YouTube, and I was like, oh, that's a an original Gamera movie. I want to check it out and see what it's like. And I was very mesmerized by it, by this notion of this giant turtle that could fly, very much like a flying saucer, which I thought was actually kind of cool. How he just slides his limbs into a shell. These flames just burst out of his arms and leg sockets, and he's just flying around. And this,
Yeah, because
that was,
obviously Godzilla is a mutated some sort of dinosaur that's
mm,
created via, the nuclear blast at Hiroshima. I'm
yeah,
assuming.
the
Uh,
hydrogen bomb, the
yeah,
Bikini
the
Atoll.
hydrogen bomb. Yeah, it created and mutated what we can only assume is either it's 100% an undiscovered species of dinosaur,
Mm,
and that was the birth of Godzilla. And Gamera, they decided to go with a completely different creature, which was a giant turtle.
yeah,
And going back to the rivalry between Godzilla and Gamera, back way back when they
mm,
made Godzilla, Godzilla became Godzilla 1954 to be exact. He was a metaphor for the nuclear bomb and the effects of radiation and
that's right.
the atomic testing, because back in the day Japan wasn't allowed to or make a direct or any sort of reference to that time at that time because of
That's right.
things that went on. So
Yeah,
that's why they created Godzilla, and Godzilla basically became that symbol for that time of
that's right.
Hiroshima and obviously, the atomic testings. So he was a very serious character. And if anyone has seen the film, it's a very serious, dark, bleak movie.
And quite a gritty one as well in some
Yeah,
moments.
absolutely. And then you have Gamera, who, when he came around, he was more child friendly.
Yeah,
He was the guardian of children. He had, over the top abilities compared to Godzilla, which was more, yes, we're talking about giant creatures, fictional characters, but Godzilla originally was created more grounded,
yeah,
where Gamera was over the top, and then later on, Gamera basically became um, like a child friendly film series. And obviously, the great thing about Toho, after they had seen the success of the Gamera series being more lean towards children, they turned the Godzilla character from a gritty, darker character and, a symbol of, what he was a symbol of, to
mm,
following in the same footsteps and becoming more friendly, focused, and
mm,
child friendly. And the films got crazier and crazier. And that
yeah,
was something that Gamera did to the Godzilla franchise.
yeah. I think that.
And
Uh, oh, sorry.
no, no, carry on. What were you about to say, Daniel?
Well, I think that the craziness worked for Gamera because from the outset it had a target audience that would later on be more geared toward. I think it was already geared toward children from the get go, and that was the advantage uh, of it. Whereas Godzilla, again, as we said, was grounded on more serious circumstances. But again, the problem was is that when something begins as an allegory for nuclear weapons and then changes to compete not just with Gamera but also because at this point in the late 60s into the 70s there was a financial uh, problem with the film industry in Japan, and the studios needed some way to generate more money to, and also
So
to
the
somehow cope with all of the
so they
layoffs.
turn to the kids.
That's
So
right.
that's the best way to make money, is to turn to the kids and turn what was
Turn to
once a
kids'
symbol
families.
and
Mm,
a darker character and turned him into like an anti-hero.
yeah,
And throughout the history of Gamera and Godzilla, they've kind of always been on in like a battle where Gamera was always for children. Uh, Godzilla started off as being, a symbol for Hiroshima, and then he became an anti-hero, and then things changed again in the 90s when
yeah,
they created the Heisei series,
mhm,
the Heisei series, and what ended up happening is Gamera got more gritty and got more serious and created, for me, the best trilogy within the Kaiju franchise.
yeah. I
And
also,
then,
mm, yeah,
no,
I
carry
also,
on.
yeah, I also liked how they changed Gamera's origin in that one, where he's created by this Atlantean civilization, like with the Gauss uh, in that trilogy. And I think that was it was a fresh way the of reinventing the Gamera uh, franchise in a way that wasn't, it didn't completely I'll try and put this into the right words. It doesn't completely negate the whole, oh damn it. Sorry, I've completely lost my words there. My
No,
apologies.
no, don't you worry. But what I'm leading to with all this is with Gamera and Godzilla, they've always been head to head. They've always competed. They've
Hmm.
both been child friendly. They've both been serious. But then Godzilla took the lead, and he's continued his path throughout the years, through spawning the Warner Brothers legendary MonsterVerse,
Yeah.
which has continued to get bigger. It's been a slow burn, but I do believe it's heading in the right direction. We're getting a new film out next year,
Hmm.
and this year we are also getting a brand new television series coming out in November.
Monarch.
Correct. Monarch Legacy of Monsters on Apple TV.
Mm.
Now, we can talk about that a bit later, but oh, get that off. But where this is leading, because there's been no kind of mention of Gamera for years, and people are starting to lose hope
Yeah.
because Godzilla was continuing to, take over the world, as you like, both in Japan and across, in the West, because we had in 2016 we had the Japanese
Shin
film
Godzilla.
Shin Godzilla. Then Godzilla was, the making the MonsterVerse happen. There was no sign of anything of Gamera. And then all of a sudden, and I think it was early this year, there was a glimmer of hope with a lot of buzz and little tweets here and there and rumours of an announcement. And then it finally came. We finally got what we were waiting for. Gamera Rebirth,
Hmm.
which launched on, I think, the 7th of September on Netflix. And what can we say about this series? We've got a lot to talk about. You know, it's been a long time coming. Godzilla's had two shots within the world of anime, in animation. And my personal opinion is, I think there was a lot of potential that was squandered with them
I
because
agree.
it was more about the science and made them far too more complicated than they had to be. Because
Mm.
there's always been this yin yang balance with kaiju movies in general. Do you want a lot of conversation and a good plot with the human characters, and then you want the monster battles? And sometimes the plot become overcomplicated that it skips over the main focus, which should always be the monster battles. And I felt is that with Godzilla Singular Point, which is on Netflix, that was an opportunity that was squandered. It had focused so much on like calculations and science, and
Mm,
you didn't really see much of Godzilla till the very end of that particular series. The
that's right.
Godzilla 8th, yeah, in the Godzilla 8th trilogy, unfortunately, that just didn't live up to my expectations.
It had a
But
great. Sorry.
no, no, continue.
Yeah. The Godzilla trilogy, it had a great concept behind it and a very interesting setting since for Godzilla it wasn't really it was new territory to have it set in a very distant future and in an interesting circumstance where kaiju have literally taken over the world. The problem there is it's not it is the science, but it's also the characters, and despite it being three-dimensional, I just find them so one-dimensional, or I mean, just under two-dimensional. Anything. I think that, but the problem is the only character who I think stood out was the evil priest Metphis, especially
Yes.
in the third
Hmm.
installment, which to me that's a big problem. It's good that that character is being developed, but he's being more developed than the main character who is supposed to be rooting for, who throughout the story should be as equally developed and interesting, not
Hmm.
just have one objective, which is just literally two words: kill Godzilla.
Yes. And obviously, when it came to Godzilla, I thought they squandered the opportunity with him, with the
Mm,
battles, with the kaiju fights. There could have been some epic fighting,
mm,
but it didn't happen.
no,
So, the shining light, though, is, in my personal opinion, when it comes to the animation fight between Gamera and Godzilla. Godzilla's whooped
yeah,
Gamera's arse, basically, for years and years in terms of popularity and in terms of um, the size of the franchises. Gamera, he had a great run with the trilogy in the 1990s,
mm,
and now he's came back, and once again he's proven that he is a threat. Because for me personally, Gamera Rebirth was the animated series that were needed.
yeah, yeah. I like to second that.
So, Dan, talk about Gamera Rebirth and just walk with through your feelings on it, what you liked about it, what you disliked about it, if you did dislike anything, and out of all the new reincarnations of the kaiju that we've seen,
Mm.
what was your particular favourite?
Ah, no, I think my particular favorite redesigned kaiju. I think I'd probably have to say it was either Gamera or Gauss, because well, like with Gauss, he's like the Rodan of the Gamera franchise, as some people have put it. Gauss is very formidable, not just as both on its own, as we see in the grand finale of in the final episode, but it's also terrifying as a swarm. It's more like a parasite. I mean, that's how I've always seen Gauss, in the sense that it's this parasitic swarm, a bit like how locusts when they destroy crops. That's Gauss, but it's destroying human civilization. And I think the and I think that they nailed the character. Well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, this might sound a bit odd, but the character motivations of the kaiju were uh, were on point
Hmm.
in Rebirth, I think, and I
Hmm.
especially like the soundtrack for it. Even when mainly when Gamera comes in, you have set of drums. You have the guitar playing in the
Mm-hmm.
background, and it's just like, oh, shit's going down now. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, and the fights, they don't disappoint. They do not disappoint, and they're especially brutal. And this is one thing I also like about Gamma Rebirth. It captures both the brutality and the grittiness of
Yes.
of the Heisei era, but it also has that kid friendly vibe from the Showa era as well. And I think it actually balances the two very brilliantly in the finished in the finished series.
Mm. What I liked about Gamera Rebirth is, we could sit here and individually talk about each of the episodes,
Mm,
but I want to talk about it as one long plot. Because anyone that does choose to watch Gamera Rebirth that hasn't or may be interested, I don't really want to give too much of the plot away because I don't want to spoil it for people. Um, but basically, it is set in 1980. It's set during the summer of 1989. So for me, what I really enjoyed, and I'm going to talk about the human characters, it's about a group of friends. It's about friendship.
yeah.
You've got a group of friends who, the soon, people are getting older, the soon, kind of grow, not grow apart, but go separate ways because they're going to different schools or whatever, or, you know, one's leaving the school to go to the high school, and the younger one's staying where he is. And it's about this bond between these group of friends who somehow get involved in this really, unique situation involving these giant kaiju monsters. And Gamera seems to come out of nowhere to be the hero to save these children. And it's a long integrated plot, which in the beginning I didn't know if I was going to enjoy the characters, because like you've mentioned, when it came to the Godzilla Earth trilogy, I didn't care much at all for the characters.
Mm,
I didn't care much for the characters in Godzilla Singular Point.
yeah.
And I had similar vibes in the beginning of Gamera Rebirth. But then suddenly, as each of the 6 episodes go along, which is another brilliant thing, this is only 6 episodes long. It's easy viewing, and it
Mm,
gives you everything you want within that you expect from a kaiju television series or a movie. It's got a simplified plot. It's about a group of friends who get involved in this, situation, and they get taken away by a company called the Foundation that are seen to protecting them because
mm,
apparently the kaiju have a craving for human children, which takes you back to the early era of Gamera, where he was saving children from all these different aliens and threats.
mm,
But then it has the nitty gritty side of it, where it has a simplified plot that kind of goes dark as each episode goes along, because
yeah.
you find out different twists with the different characters. You then learn to care about the characters. You want to see them survive. You want to see them succeed. And the characters that you learn to dislike, you want to see get the comeuppance.
Yeah.
And then in between all of that, you then have the amazing kaiju fights with Gamera and all of the characters, the different kaiju.
Yeah.
And for me personally, because Gamera has been away for so long, this was the perfect introduction or reintroduction to a new generation of kaiju fans.
A fresh start.
Because a fresh start, hence the name Rebirth. It
Mm,
makes perfect sense, and it's a perfect opportunity for anybody that has never ever seen a kaiju product, a film series. This is the perfect place to begin.
mm,
And I think with Rebirth, um, this could have worked as an actual a live action film series. Each episode could have been, with a little more in depthness, a film of a new film series with the modern redesigns of the older kaiju.
Yeah.
And my personal favorite of all the characters that the kaiju that's been redesigned and modernized is 100% Zigra.
Mm.
He made me. I was very questionable about his redesign due to the fact that, as you know, he's in the Showa era. He's a shark,
A shark from space.
a shark from space. What's more crazier than a shark from space? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Um, then all of a sudden, he's now more like a stingray. But I was so worried how he was going to come across, how he would, you know, interact. But then he was phenomenal in the water, and it made so much sense why they redesigned him. And he looks better. I think it works better. And when he goes on land, I don't know if you noticed the way he manoeuvred. He reminded me of a skull crawler
Yeah.
from
From
Kong
Skull
Skull
Island.
Island.
Yeah.
You know, the way he like walks with two legs and no other limbs and a longer tail. It made perfect sense. So for me, he's my favourite kaiju. I love, like I say, each of the characters. The very last episode, it did pull at your heartstrings with a potential sacrifice that we might see. So, what else would you like to say about Gamera Rebirth? Like anything else that you want to contribute or comment on
Mm.
the series?
Yeah. I think that where it another area where Gamma Rebirth succeeds, opposed to Godzilla Singular Point, there is a lot less filler between episodes because I mean, of course, it's very centered on the techno babble and the science, but it just feels too much like they're intentionally padding out the runtime, whereas the kaiju, they even make appearances for either too little, or there's the human character going on along with that, and it just pulls away from the kaiju to give us more of the people. With Gamera Rebirth, what I like about it
Mm,
is it doesn't do that. If the kaiju appears, it shows the kaiju. And when Gamera appears to fight the kaiju, it shows the fight. And when it does get
absolutely.
back to the people, it's not them messing around. It's the characters, the children, trying to survive. And that, I think, is what makes the kaiju action in there, I think, more intense, because there's a stake that we, the audience, have for the survival of the characters. In Singular Point and the Earth trilogy, it's just not there, I think, which ultimately lets both of them down.
Yes. Is there any favourite sequence within the show? Is there a favourite scene within the 6 episodes that you really enjoyed?
You know, one scene which I had to say caught me completely off guard, and I was very much surprised by, was Giron's appearance
Hmm.
in that.
He's the
With
most
yeah,
altered of the design, but I
yeah,
think it's a design that 100% worked.
oh yeah, and I also liked how, I don't know if you noticed this, but there was some elements of I would say biomechanical uh presence in there, like with the xenomorph from Alien. If you look
Yes.
at the xenomorph's tail, you have those small columns of bone that are almost rectangular and they're
Hmm.
angled at the top of the tail. I noticed that on Giron, from the back of the head all the way down to, and I was like, wow, that is very Geiger-esque for some reason. And yeah,
Yeah.
and I like that. I really did like that in the character design.
Hmm. if we look at Giron, I've always looked at him as Gamera's version of Gigan. He's
Yeah.
engineered, he's clearly an engineered kaiju. He's
Mm.
made of flesh and mechanics. And, you've seen the redesign in Godzilla Final Wars of Gigan.
Oh yeah.
He was more lethal, he looked more dangerous, he was jacked to hell with weapons. He
Yeah.
was a threat, like no other. Now, what they did with Gearon here, they did exactly the same way. They made him look more deadly, they made him more lethal, and he looked he looked 100% dangerous, that it's something you would not want to mess with.
Yeah. And I also liked how they brought back the ability where he shoots those stars
Mm-hmm.
out of his head as well, which in the in in the anime, in Rebirth, I mean, the way they did that was very well executed, a bit like a surprise attack. Like it wasn't how it was shown in Gamera versus Giron, where it's like, oh, there's a space gauss and Giron's going to dismember it so he can show his abilities to give an idea as to what Gamera is in store for. Giron's attack here, it's again, it's very much the same abilities, but it's just played as a complete surprise. There's no practice. It's straight up a trick out of the sleeve, and that
Mm-hmm.
completely catches you off guard.
Yes. So we've talked about Gearon, how he's been completely altered and looks amazing. We've talked about Zigra, how he's went from space shock to lethal, super stingray. Um, for me, I honestly thought, because of everything that was going on, the final kaiju that was revealed on the final poster was Veras.
Mm.
And I honestly thought he was going to be the end boss, basically. What was your opinion of Veras and his redesign, which is a like the rest of the Showa era kaiju? They've all had a completely 100 redesign. They've all been modernized for like the modern, era we live in.
Mm.
So, what's your take on Veras's
Yeah.
appearance?
Well, when I saw Virus when it was fully merged in its final form, I was immediately thinking, okay, it's Virus if it were designed by H.P. Lovecraft. In other words, a throwback to Cthulhu, which uh, looking back at it now, I can still see that they were kind of going for Cthulhu, but when I saw it the first time, I was like, "Oh wow, this is new. I hadn't. This is incredible." And of course, changing the origin from another one of the alien invaders from deep space into this uh, sort of ancient demon that was viewed as some sort of godlike entity. It was it was like a like oh, how can I say it's I'm not quite sure if a breath of fresh air is the right expression I'm looking for, but it was like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, yes, it's Virus, it's recognizable, the design is there, but it's the introduction is God, this is terrifying. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is genuinely terrifying.
Yes, and he was, formidable against Gamera,
Yeah.
100%. And that's what I loved about Gamera Rebirth, is that back in the Showa era, like you see, them films are for children.
Mm,
That each of the characters are, they can't make them too grotesque or too frightening or too lethal or show this or that. Even when you're seeing Gamera bleed,
yeah,
it's like green paint flying out.
yeah.
They
Even
couldn't really show like anything too crazy.
yeah,
Where these versions, like you said, they're a breath of fresh air. They are completely been designed to make them modernized, make them more terrifying. And as much as the show is it can be for kids, but I didn't know if you notice there's a lot of f
Yeah.
bombs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of f bombs. There's a lot of swearing. There's a lot of fuck yous and you
What
piece
all
of
the
shit
time.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of these going on, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
It's a show that looks like it's for kids, but it's clearly made for young
Yeah.
adults and clear kaiju fans, and that's what made this work.
Yeah.
They
I just
modernized the character, they made it for adults,
yeah.
and it delivered in every sense of the way. Another show very similar to this is, and I think it's better than the two films combined, was
Hmm.
Pacific Rim the Black,
Okay.
which is on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, Daniel, I highly recommend you see that. It's very similar, where it has a great plot, great kaiju action, great kaiju on mech action, but it
Mm.
also has a really interesting plot. And there's a couple of moments where it'll blow your mind where you'll not see coming. So check that out. Pacific Rim the Black. And if you had to rate um, Gamera Rebirth out of 1 to 10, what would you score it?
Ah. Now I'd have to. I'm gonna go for quite a high number and say that I'd give it a 9, and the reason why is, or maybe a 9.5. But I think because as much as I enjoyed the grand finale, there were moments when it felt like, okay, it's going to be a cliffhanger ending. It's like, oh no, it's not. It's going to be resolved, and it reverts back to feeling like it's going to be a cliffhanger ending. And it's like, no, it's actually going to be resolved, and it's like, I'm not. I mean, I'm not. No, because thinking about it, it's as if they were in the writing department. They were thinking, okay, how should we end this? Should we have it on a cliffhanger that shocks audiences, or should we give it a ending that resolves the story that we're telling? And it's like they call a compromise on all of these ideas and they merge them into one, which at on first watch is like, yeah, oh, I see. You're trying to throw the audience, but then you bring them back and you try and throw them again, but then you bring them back and give them a definitive ending. And it's like, yeah, it's either one or the other. But I think after a second viewing, I might change. I might change my views on it. But no, I won't talk about the the scene after that because I don't want to spoil
Mm-hmm.
for anyone who hasn't seen it. So I'll just leave that uh, for the
Yeah.
viewers themselves to watch.
Yes. So what would you give it between 1 and 10?
On Nintendo, I'd give it a 9.5.
I'm right there with you. 9.5. I'm gonna give it 9.5 because it's great to see Gamera back on the screens. It may not be a movie, but it is one hell of a amazing, anime show. I'm giving it a 9.5 because of the redesigns of the kaiju. They brought
Mm.
all of the characters back, give them a modern, remake that worked. The plot wasn't too complicated. It was simple to understand. There were characters you grew to care about, and of course, Gamera, he just kicked the arse out of
Yeah,
anything that come in his way, and that's what I would want. We want a simplified plot with characters you can connect with in the kaiju action that we deserve, and
yeah,
that is exactly what Gamera Rebirth delivered.
yeah. 9.5 gals fried by Gamera, cooked to
Correct.
perfection.
Absolutely. So now that we've talked about that, we're all talking kaiju. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening now in the world of kaiju. Because 8 or 9, even 10 years ago, nobody outside of the 1950s, the 80s, from the 1950s, sorry, all the way I would say up to the late 90s, was when Kaiju was at its peak and then was slowly on a bit of a decline.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, obviously, America had the 1998 Godzilla film, basically Lizard in the City, I like to call it.
Or a
Um,
remake of 20,000 Fathoms.
yeah, well, basically, that's basically what it is,
Yeah.
which we're not going to go into that because we'd be here all night.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, I believe that the Big Bang in what got the public interested in kaiju was 100% Cloverfield, because it was unique, it was different, it was a different take on a found footage film, and I really believe that started the buzz, because it
Yeah.
was not long after that that we got the announcement of Pacific Rim, the announcement of Godzilla 2014.
Mm.
Now, here we are heading in to 2024. We've now had three American movies featuring Godzilla. King Kong has now made a resurgence. Gamera Rebirth. The obviously we now have obviously the two anime Godzilla series. There's other kaiju properties being talked about. There's a King Kong produced Disney Plus show coming.
Please be a Varan reboot. Please bring back Varan.
We know how much you love Veram. But I am going to touch on that later on, near the end. Um, but what's your opinion and thought on how far the kaiju genre has come since, you know, since the early days to where we are now?
I think it has come a hell of a long way since its inception back in 1954, and I think it has even longer to go, and it has it's basically its longevity. It seems so endless. I mean, for instance, you could have a kaiju movie set in the distant future on a human settlement on another planet. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, humanity arrives on Mars. It's been 5, 6 years, maybe a decade or two into colonizing the planet, and already there are these there's this kaiju-esque creature that's been lying under the surface. Man has disturbed this creature under the Martian surface, and it's basically defending its territory from what it's perceiving as intruders. And yeah,
Sounds like that sounds like a good idea. You better start writing that movie now, then, Daniel.
oh, I will.
You better get on that. But I think if you look at like the last 10 years, it's always been about Star Wars science fiction going into the Star Wars Star Trek. Then
Mm,
we've always had the superhero buzz. We've had the westerns. Westerns were a big thing. Then we had crime movies like mob movies, and then the kaiju genre was the big thing in the 50s.
mm,
And there's always been a glimmer with the kaiju franchise. I think it's never going to be a franchise. Well, I do have hope with the Monsterverse, but the franchise, the kaiju, it's always been like more of a cult following.
yeah,
It's not like people wouldn't say it mainstream like Star Wars or Marvel or
or James
DC.
Bond.
Yes, but it's always survived and it's always continued to thrive in
And I
its
believe
own
it will
way.
do so for
And
many, many years to come.
well, I now believe that there could be a change of the tide,
Oh, yeah?
because who would have thought, after years and years, we are now getting this bad boy coming out in December. Originally, it's coming out in Japan in November, but now we are getting this
Yeah.
Godzilla minus one. Now, the look of this movie alone, it has a completely different feel to anything that we have had in the past,
Mm,
because it is clearly, sorry, a modern remake or a modern incarnation of the 1954 original Godzilla. You can clearly see, if you watch the trailer, its influences. And in fact, for those that have never seen the trailer, I might as well show it to the amazing audience that hopefully will be watching us and enjoying this video. So what I'm going to do, for those that have never seen a Godzilla movie, who might want to, enjoy a Godzilla movie, we are going to enjoy the trailer together. And this is Godzilla -1.
Should we mute the mic so it's not talkback on the...
Godzilla -1.
So there we go. For anybody that has always been intrigued about the Godzilla franchise, Godzilla -1 is, what's the number film it is now? Because I've lost count. Can you remember, Daniel? Is
I
it
think
69?
Oh, so we're including the... Right. Let's see. 8. The Final Wars is 29, I think. Then there's Legendary, Shin, King of the Monsters, and then Godzilla vs. Kong. So I think that's 33. Add on -1, I think it's 34. But I might be... Yeah, I'm gonna go with 34 on that. Excluding those, I think it's 30 or... Yeah.
Well, what not many people might know about the Godzilla franchise is that it's one of the oldest franchises in cinema. And I think it's even got more films than James Bond. So even though it might not be mainstream to a lot of people, it has lasted the test of time. And Godzilla -1 is the next incarnation, and for the first time in a very long time, it's actually getting a North American release, which is the point I wanted to make with how far the franchise has come, how far the kaiju genre has come. And when I said before I could see a turn of the tide, I honestly believe -1, Godzilla -1 could potentially be that turn, because I think it's going to give audiences who may not have seen the franchise or were never interested in the original Toho Japanese versions, they might now give this a shot. Because that trailer gives you vibes that it's nothing silly, that it's, we're all over man in a rubber suit running around breaking, buildings and stuff. But this is something I think that they would look at and generally want to go see.
Mm.
And hopefully there'll be a UK release for you and me. If not before Christmas, hopefully after Christmas. Be a
Yeah.
nice after Christmas surprise if we could go when we've got a bit of money after we've bought all our family, all the Christmas presents, have a bit of extra cash so we could go to the cinema at the C minus one.
Yeah.
So, what is your opinion on minus one, and what are your hopes for this film?
Yeah. Well, I think this is going to be an interesting one because, to my knowledge, Godzilla or Kaiju cinema hasn't really done a period piece. I guess you would, if that would be a term for it. But yeah, expanding the horizons by not just going forwards into the future or science fiction settings of tomorrow, but actually stepping into a world of the past and actually having it so soon, as the trailer said, right after the country's defeat in the Second World War. I think that there's going to be a sort of horror element to it with this uh, resurgence of the atom bomb, because even then the memories of those who perished in the atomic bombings is still fresh, and it still resonates with the country of Japan. And I think that having Godzilla appear in an apocalyptic world is really going to make it more terrifying, I think, than it was in Shin Godzilla, or maybe even in the Cold War setting of the Return of Godzilla, maybe.
Mm. See, that's the only thing I think separates Gamera from Godzilla, is that Godzilla has always had the upper hand in terms of what he's been able to bring. He's
Mm,
always been a character that's had a message, whether that's a dark message, a message about, like you've said, Hiroshima, the nuclear bombs, the testings, whether it's about pollution, the environment, Mother Earth. There's always been these undertones within the Godzilla franchise that has had greater meaning. And that's something that's also always separated, in my opinion, Godzilla from Gamera. And I think that's why he's always been the character in the kaiju, why that everyone's been more attractive to.
yeah,
And why I said I believe there's a turn in the tide, not just because of how this film looks, but it's the feel of the movie. It's
that's
giving me
right.
1954 vibes. It's giving me, it looks like it's going to be a very serious, very nitty gritty film. And the last time I had chills over a Godzilla movie was when I seen the first one in the theatre. I was lucky several years ago to get when the Godzilla 1954 was brought into the British Film Institute. They released it on DVD, and they also had several screenings in cinema, and I got to see it on the big screen. I'd seen it many times on the television, but to see it on the big screen in black and white in all its glory, the chills I got watching that, and I was 100% fixated on the screen, 100% sucked in, and it was like I was watching it for the first time. And I've never had them vibes or feelings since I seen this trailer for minus one. So that is my reason why I believe this is going to change the tide, and I think this is the beginning. I would like to think of something a lot bigger. I just feel like this film is going to make a difference. I believe this film is going to do well, and I believe this film is going to turn a lot of heads.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's going to be heads looking at the Kaiju franchise as a whole, and the franchise is continuing to grow. The Japanese franchise for Toho Studios, who is the parent studio of Godzilla, it's more traditional of how Godzilla was, where the MonsterVerse legendary Godzilla. It's Godzilla. It has his heart. It has, he, integrates many aspects of what made Godzilla Godzilla. But he's also, in my opinion, a different animal, a different beast. And in some ways, they've made him the modern day superhero.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I get from Legendary's Godzilla. Yes, he's an animal. Yes, I love the world building, but I've always preferred the more grounded, gritty version of the Godzilla character. And that's what we get more of with the Toho series.
I prefer that interpretation as well. I'm also hoping that at some point they tap more into the horror aspects that Godzilla has the potential to sort of branch into. They they look like they're actually going to do that again with the post with the setting just after the bombs.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there was some potential with Shin Godzilla in terms of gore and body horror when bits of his spine were blown off
Mm-hmm.
in the night in the night raid sequence, or when there was the deleted scene of those eyes growing in that mass of flesh, or just before that, the end credits crawl, we have the humanoids coming out of Godzilla's tail. I think that these these are elements that not just Godzilla, but I think kaiju in general have a very uh, worthy potential to tap into and create something that has not ever been seen, but also something that could have a profound impact on a lot of people and make
Yes.
even might even add a new. I don't really know if adding a new dimension to horror as a genre if is anything is in that same realm, but
Mm. The
there is.
great the great thing about the kaiju genre in general, Godzilla, Gamera, anyone, Rodan, Varan, whoever, um, there's always the opportunity to add different elements from different film genres. You can have comedy, you can have action, you can have drama, you can then have horror. You
Mm,
can turn them into a thriller. You can turn them into a crime story. Like a mob story that ends up featuring a kaiju, which he has another movie that's in development. There's a comic that was released called what was it called? My mind's went blank. There's a comic coming out featuring a kaiju during a bank robbery.
ooh,
That's a kaiju heist. So it's a comic book that came out. I can't remember the creator of it, but that's in development where basically there's a group of international bank robbers or whoever, they go into a major city to rob the vault of a major bank. And as they're going on, a kaiju attacks the city and builds its nest around the bank. So there you go. That's something different. So you do have the potential to create any kind of genre and mix in kaiju. That's how good kaiju are. And this is things that I think people miss out on. That they don't realize that there's more aspects to kaiju than just monsters fighting.
yeah,
And but like we mentioned earlier on, yeah, the beginning of this discussion, it's hard to get the balance right, and
yeah,
that's where we either hit or miss. But the action with the monsters is always there. So we've talked about Gamera Rebirth. We've given it a 9 out of 10. We've seen bright future for the kaiju genre. We've got -1 heading our way. The final thing I would like to mention for a lot of people who hopefully have made it all the way through here, and you've listened to what me and Daniel's had to say. There is continuation on the western side of the Godzilla franchise, the Kaiju franchise. Like I said, Kaiju Heist is going to be made by, it's in development and it will come from a studio somewhere in Hollywood. You've also got the remake of Them coming out, which I mentioned right at the beginning was a massive hit in the 1950s about the giant ants that get, mutated via nuclear testings in the desert of New Mexico, I believe it was. So
Mm.
that's on its way. And of course, we all know about the legendary Monsterverse. And like I mentioned before, for me, the legendary Godzilla is more or less being turned into a kaiju superhero. The same
Mm.
with Kong. They're the two main faces. I would love to see, more kaiju, maybe not from the Toho library, not, Legendary's original kaiju. I would love to see a few more from past films, other, genres coming. Maybe Gorgo from the UK. We've got our own kaiju, yeah. He deserves a shot. And he's kind of having his own bit of a resurgence via potentially a comic book sequel being produced by Titanus Creations.
They've even had a figure made of him recently.
Yes, I've got it on pre-order. I know all about it. Um, so yeah, so I want to end our discussion on kaiju by talking about the legendary monsterverse. We had Godzilla 2014. We had um, Kong Skull Island, uh, Godzilla King of the Monsters, and then we had Godzilla versus Kong. And next year, coming, I believe now in April, not March, because the date's been pushed back, we are having Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire. But prior to that, there's even one more surprise, and that is this. I mentioned it before. Monarch Legend, no, Monarch Legacy of Monsters. Now, what's your opinion of this show, Daniel?
No,
Or, in
well,
fact, what's your opinion not of the show, but what Legendary and Warner Brothers have been able to do with the Godzilla character?
well, I think that they've pretty much kept Godzilla true to itself in terms of the character's behavior and his trademarks. Which the first time I saw that in the cinema in 2014, I I was blown away by really just how faithful they remained to the character compared to 1998. And I think that now, after seeing what they were able to do with Rodan, Mothra, and Ghidra in King of the Monsters, uh, I'm I'm interested to see and what else they do, not just with Godzilla, but with the other kaiju that they have access to in their monsterverse. And I'm also uh, wondering what it's going to be like on the human side, because in Gareth Edwards' 2014 film, I actually liked the human drama
Mm-hmm.
that was going on in there. Even and yes, everyone I spoke to at school was very disappointed because they only paid money to see Bryan Cranston because of Breaking Bad. That was the only reason
Yes.
why those people actually went to see it.
Yeah.
But
And he lasted 10 minutes.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, but the screen time he had, I think he gave a really good performance uh, with the role that with what he was given in the role, and I think that if there's going to be, I mean, there might be, I don't know, but if there's a flashback scene to when Ford's father, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, his father, played by Bryan Cranston, if there's a flashback sequence where he's actually looking inside the quarantine zone uh back in it where the reactor was destroyed in Gareth Edwards' film, if they played a bit more on that, but from his perspective, whereas, for example, we see his reaction to what he's seeing, but we don't actually see what he's seen inside the quarantine complex, which adds mystery to what we have already seen in Gareth Edwards' film, but deepens it on a on a different level, as it were. And I'm also, and this is wishful thinking, that that they throw in some monsters from Hollywood's history, like the Retrosaurus from The Beast in 20,000 Fathoms, or maybe include the ants from them, or
Mm-hmm.
perhaps or maybe the giant octopus from It Came from Beneath the Sea, which again, hopeful thinking on my part. But I also, because knowing that Kurt Russell and his and his son are going to be in this playing the same character, I think there's going to be a lot of non-linear storyline or jumping to and from the past and the present with the main character, which I think is an interesting way to sort of further develop the human characters to give us more of an anchor point uh, through this world expanding with these monsters slowly coming out of secrecy that Monarch has put before the public for God knows how many years that they've been doing this since the events of Kong Skull Island, and we might even get expand on that as well. We might even find out more about the skull crawlers than we did in Kong Skull Island. We might find out more about the other kaiju that appeared in the background of King of the Monsters. Yeah, I'm all for what this show has to offer.
Mm, I am too, and I'm going to tell you my reasons. Um, for me personally, I am a fan of the MonsterVerse. Like you see, you know, I was a huge fan of Transformers growing up, and Michael Bay destroyed my childhood because them villains are shit. But what Gareth Edwards was able to do with Godzilla 2014, he literally brought my childhood back to life. I was the perfect director. He was a fan of the franchise, fan of the character, and he made it it obviously wasn't as gritty or dark or had that tone to it like you do with some of the Toho original Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
But it captured the heart, the essence of the character, and it was just overall a great story. There's a lot of people that complain that there isn't enough kaiju or enough Godzilla in the film, but if anyone's seen the 1954 Godzilla film, there isn't a lot of Godzilla really in it. It's more about the environment and the effects of everything else going around, and like you see, the drama within the human characters. And it's hard, like I said
Mm.
before, getting that balance. But I believe that there was a great balance within Godzilla 2014. That is why it's my favourite out of all of the MonsterVerse films.
Yeah.
And Godzilla King of the Monsters for me was a love letter from a fan to the fans. It had all the
Yes.
elements from all of the original Showa era movies. He tried to
Including
put,
the soundtrack.
yes, it was. That's why that film didn't do as well as it did at the box office, because maybe a lot of regular cinema goers that don't understand the franchise wouldn't have got the references, wouldn't have, understood it. But if you were a kaiju fan or a Godzilla fan or just a fan of good old science fiction and big popcorn flicks, you would have got it.
Mm.
Godzilla versus Kong, that basically featured a lot of what the previous films didn't, which was what we wanted, more kaiju fighting, but with an over the top, super crazy plot.
Yeah.
And Kong Skull Island, that for me was very much like um, Godzilla 2014, it was a great introduction to Kong, another reintroduction in the fact that it was set in the Vietnam War. It, for me, was a perfect introduction to this version of Kong.
Mm.
As for Monarch Legacy of Monsters, the fact that it's in between 2014 and King of the Monsters, I am more excited for this than I am the next Monsterverse film, Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire, because I believe just looking at the movie, looking at the show, forgetting where I am, looking at the show itself, it looks like it's set in the same world as Gareth Edwards, with its tone, with its vibe, and with its feel. And it looks like it's going to be a great continuation for the Monsterverse. So, for anybody that is interested and is curious to see what we're talking about, let me show you Monarch Legacy of Monsters, the trailer.
I don't know if this will get to you. I hope so. I can't go back in time and fix all the mistakes I made. But maybe I could leave something for the future. A legacy.
The world is on fire. I decided to do something about it. Hopes, dreams, ambitions. The mission was to protect their world and ours. It's what we wanted Monarch to be. Instead of chasing monsters. If you come with me, you'll know everything. I promise.
Now that shot alone, it had me. It had me like, yep, I am going to 100% be fully invested in this show, because I love the fact that via the trailer it's shown you characters from previous films, and it's obviously shown you events that we didn't see on screen within 2014. Obviously, the incident that happened on the bridge, you can clearly see that. You can clearly, see that scene right at the end of that trailer is set during that time when he
Yeah.
bursts through the bridge. So that alone, the fact you're getting to see things that we hadn't seen on screen in previous films, is a great way to get the fans who may had lost interest with, the human plot where the screen would go to black or go to human characters as the kaiju, are about to fight or whatever, and we didn't get to see the things that were happening, out on the other side. The fact that they're now going to show us some of that, and we're going to actually be involved in it, for me, is the most exciting part of this series.
Yeah. I also like how they've maintained continuity between Gareth Edwards' film and this new series. Because if you look at Godzilla's design, you notice that they went back to that design with 2014 before they changed the spines in King of the Monsters to reflect the traditional Godzilla design.
Yes, the smaller spines in everything, and what's even more fascinating and exciting. The fact that they've got those little details in the show, that it seems, and like the introduction to these new kaiju that we've never heard of or seen before. So at the end of all this, at the end of a review, at the end of a little mini discussions on the 1950s, how kaiju genre began, we've talked about Gamera Rebirth, we've talked about, obviously, the original Godzilla franchise, and now we've talked about the Western Monsterverse. As you can see, the kaiju genre is well and truly thriving and is still alive. And like I say, it might not be to many mainstream, but to me, it's a genre and a franchise that is always going to stick around. It's going to last longer, and it's always going to just come out there when you least expect it with a gem, whether it's a Toho original, another Japanese company original, or whether it is a Western studio that gives the kaiju a chance. We've had it with Pacific Rim, we've had it with Cloverfield, we've had it with the Monsterverse. Who's next? Gamera? Varan? Gorgo? The world is looking bright for the world of kaiju. Now, I would like to finish with one more thing before we go, and that is Daniel, I want you to talk about what you have been doing and what you have been working on, because I know that you are a fantastic amateur stop motion film creator. I have watched some of your shorts and I have been blown away by them. The effort you must take to make them, I know it must be incredibly difficult, but you put your heart and soul into it because you're passionate about it. And for anyone watching, Dan, would you like to tell them your YouTube channel where people can watch your shorts and the work that you've produced?
Gladly. My channel on YouTube is Dan Filming. It's all there, one word. And the projects I'm working on, there are this one project which has been shot. It just needs to be edited together. Is the second and final part of Godzilla versus Varan. So I hope that when it's finished and I manage to upload it, you guys will be able to enjoy and leave all of your comments for me to read and be completely incredibly thankful for. I can't stress enough just how much the feedback really lets me know what you guys think of what the finished film, how it impacts you, and that is partly what keeps me going. Second, the second project I have a set built for it, which I'm going to be very careful to bring it over.
Ooh, an exclusive, people, an exclusive on the entertainment headquarters, Kaiju Konnections.
Here it
Ooh.
is,
Wow.
closer to camera.
Well, look at the detail. That's very well done, Daniel, and I look forward to your next feature film.
Thank you.
Your next stop motion film. I've watched part one of Godzilla vs. Varan, and I found it a fascinating watch, and I could see the detail and the effort and the hard work you put in it. And it's creative people like you, whether you're somebody who creates, fan fictions, puts their effort into stop motion, or amateur filmmakers that have a love and passion for any film genre that keeps that genre alive, whether it's the kaiju, martial arts, action, romance, horror, thriller. It has to start from somewhere, and it starts from people with a passion and great ideas and a love of the genre. So I, as a fan of the the kaiju genre appreciate you and appreciate what you're putting into everything, because I've seen it, and I hope you continue to do it, and most of all, I hope you continue to enjoy doing it, because if you don't enjoy doing it, there's no point doing it. So I do appreciate it, and everybody get out there and look for Dan Filliman on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description box when I'm all done. But I've had a blast with you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing. I've enjoyed talking kaiju. I've enjoyed talking Godzilla,
So
Gamera.
have I.
Yes.
So have I.
So
It's been great hanging out with you as well, Kevin. It's
yes.
brilliant. And thank you for inviting me onto the show tonight. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, and I'm sure there'll be a next time. But
There's
until
always
then, yeah, definitely, I'll definitely have you back on. But until then, everybody, this has been the Entertainment Network. This has been Kaiju Konnections. Get out there, find some kaiju, and watch the buildings burn.